democratic country, Ukraine. But let's talk about the making of a pariah state to the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza. Good evening, Alan.
Hello, Kevin.
Well, we heard the big news just recently that Russia has now been kicked out of the World Cup. We've already taken the Champions League final away from them. They will be thrown out of European tournaments as well. Already England and various other international teams had announced that in any case they would not play Russia. Various clubs are saying the same thing. They won't play Russian clubs. Also, a Russian ballet tour, they're excellent at ballet in Russia, of the UK has been cancelled because none of the venues will accept Russians performing there. Don't forget, we've also got the media war insofar as Russia Today, the Prime Minister has asked Ofcom to look into that television station, to examine its propaganda and possibly take it off the airwaves. And then, of course, there's the business response and the financial response. We know about the financial sanctions hitting Putin's oligarch mates, and also, of course, the business response, BP having pulled out of a massive partnership with its Russian partners only last night. So this is the process. But I don't know what you think, Alan, but it's going faster than I thought it would. And I think I always had some suspicion that Putin just wouldn't care about any of this. But it seems to be so severe and so total, the whole world seems to be united against him, that perhaps it might be causing him to have some second thoughts.
Well, it won't be causing him to have second thoughts, Kevin, but it may well be forcing people around him to have second thoughts. And that, I think, is the key to this right now. I think with this scale of revulsion, and it is, you're right, the speed and scale with which it's happened have been unprecedented. The way that the world has essentially united against him has been unprecedented, and it's got to a level where he can't really control this from a propaganda basis to prevent ordinary people from hearing about it in Russia. And of course, his elite will certainly be able to see what's going on and will be feeling the pinch themselves. So in reality, this is about, I think, influencing everyone else to go, what is your leader doing? What is he up to? What is he doing in your name? And what are you going to do about it?
Yes, I've been postulating that this is literally Putin's potentially his last roll of the dice, and it has literally become for him a life or death issue. That if this invasion goes as badly as it has done so far, if it continues to be a bit of a debacle, he's going to be in serious trouble, because if you remember Khrushchev right after the Cuban Missile, I'm not saying you personally remember it, but if you remember the Cuban missile crisis back in the early 60s, Khrushchev immediately after that was removed by the Politburo from the Kremlin hierarchy. That fate could befall Putin, and it could even get worse than that. I mean, he may end up sort of taking his own life or something like this. The success of his invasion of Ukraine is integral to his future, his very existence, isn't it?
Well, as has been said, a war of choice for him has now become a war of necessity. He absolutely has to come out victorious in some way, shape or form from this. And by the way, it's difficult to see how he could do so from the perspective of the world. Yeah, okay, maybe he might be able to conquer Ukraine, although the Ukrainians are doing a great job of slowing his advance down there. But, the rest of the world is going to still unite against him. They're going to, turn their backs on him. So it's kind of difficult to work out what his victory actually here is. And if that's the case, then what does his future hold? And does it indeed presage the Khrushchev fate of being deposed by your colleagues, people coming and saying, we've had enough now, we cannot go on with you? Now, the problem is that he has made himself, if you like, the central pillar of the Russian state. I mean, it's that ridiculously intertwined with him that to remove him potentially brings the whole thing crashing down. But they may have no choice but to take that risk, because the alternative is to face opprobrium with him.
I've been asking this of many expert guests tonight, and indeed through last week as well. Because of the extraordinary resistance of the Ukraine people, not only their military forces, just civilians as well, making Molotov cocktails is now a national obsession in Ukraine. because of that resistance and because it's not quite working out how Putin had planned. I mean, he's a bully, he's an egotist, he likes to seem tough on the world stage. Is there a fear that in his humiliation he'll up the ante and start using some serious weapons? I'm thinking of these thermobaric weapons, the vacuum bombs, and even worse, maybe even nuclear weapons. Is there a fear that in his lunacy he may turn things totally destructive?
Absolutely. I mean, you get to the stage when if he feels the game is slipping away, he may well try and order his forces to do that. And then becomes an interesting question. Number one, will his forces at that point obey? I mean, let's not forget that at various times in, say, the Nazi retreat from Europe at various points, Hitler demanded that, Paris be destroyed, and people said, no, we're not going to do it. So it might be the case that his troops end up at that point mutinying and preventing him from doing this. And it may well be that someone else in Moscow or people, step up and go, we're opposing you before you cause any more trouble. But I'm sorry to say there is a real fear that given Russian military doctrine, given the sorts of things we've already known that Putin is capable of, for example, if you remember Grozny in the early 2000s in the Chechen wars, I mean, the city was essentially razed to the ground by Putin. So he's done this before. He might well try and do it again.
And if he starts using these thermobaric weapons, which can, annihilate many thousands of people in a sort of small area, about a third of a square mile, they cause a kind of inferno of fire that vaporizes everything. It's the next worst weapon to a nuclear weapon. We've seen that they've been spotted. He's got them outside Kiev. He's got them outside Kharkiv. If he escalates to using those and we start seeing, I mean, literally tens of thousands of fatalities in these beleaguered cities, we'll be looking at a humanitarian crisis. How long will we actually just look at that? And at what point do you think we might have to actually get involved to save some lives?
Well, Kevin, you raise a very important point. And I think if you look at military interventions in the past, they've often been driven by atrocities, essentially, i.e. Either leaders promising to kill everyone or actually killing everyone. I mean, you remember the Libyan intervention. You saw debates of this over Syria. You had Bosnia. You had Kosovo. Publics in 2022 can see what's happening. They've already determined that Mr. Putin is the aggressor in this conflict. They've already got a dim view of what he's doing based on what they've seen. I can only imagine that should he employ weapons of that magnitude, of that destructive capability, that publics around the world will force their governments into some form of military action against him, because they will just say, not in our name now. It's not so much him anymore, it's about us and our response, and we cannot allow this degree of mass murder to take place and stand idly by.
So in essence, what this saga revolves around is Vladimir Putin's sanity. Do you fear that he's lost all rationale here, that he has become something of a madman? It seems that he actually did convince himself that the people of Ukraine would welcome the Russian forces with open arms as liberators, and that's what he's in a rage about now, that they didn't, and the Ukrainians are standing up to him. With that kind of logic, he's not thinking straight, perhaps.
Well, I don't go for the thesis that Putin is mad. I believe he's always been bad. On contrast, if you look at his actions throughout his career, he is a bad man. He's an evil man, actually, in terms of the damage he causes to people. So I don't think he's bad. I do think he's probably lost touch with reality. I mean, there's been enough stories about how he's been closeted from the world in the last few years. I'm sure he's surrounded by sycophants and yes men who will tell him exactly what he wants to hear. And of course, it's an encounter with reality, a rude awakening that's occurred in the last few days. And yes, he might be angry. Now, the question is, does he have enough presence of mind still to pull back from the brink and try and salvage himself somehow from the wreckage, or does he press straight on? If he presses straight on, I fear we are heading for, a grave disaster for the people of Ukraine, the people of Russia, the people, of the world for that matter, because who knows how he'll end up. But as I said, part of this is about people around him stopping him, stepping up and going, enough is enough, you're gone.
Well, fingers crossed they do that. Alan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. We're going to be talking about